My name is Lindsay Harmon. I'm the marketing manager at Collective Sun, and I'm so happy to see you guys all here. Thank you for joining us for our wonderful webinar with St. Peter's Episcopal Church and Resonant Energy, Solar for Nonprofits, How One Church is Sharing Solar Beyond Their Community. Thank you for joining us. I'll begin by introducing our speakers. We have Madeline Barr, who's the VP of Outreach and Sales and the co-founder of Resonant Energy. We have Matt Brennan, who's Collective Sun's Vice President of Sales. And of course, Jim McDaniel, who is the Property Committee Chair and Parishioner at St. Peter's Episcopal Church. Thank you all for being part of our webinar. We look forward to hearing from all of you. Quickly go over our agenda. It's a pretty quick one. We'll just be going over who Collective Sun is and how we played a part in this project, who Resonant Energy is and how they led the project into community solar and the opportunities there that Resonant Energy is offering now, which will then lead to St. Peter Episcopal Church's Solar Spotlight, where they will talk about their solar journey in multiple ways. So we're looking forward to hearing from them, of course. And then, of course, at the end, we'll have our Q&A. So as we're doing the webinar, please feel free to drop in questions that you might have. Our panelists will hopefully be able to answer them as they come in. If not, they will be addressed during the Q&A section of the webinar. And if the questions aren't answered, we'll definitely be following up with you with anything that isn't done at that time. So thank you so much. At this time, I'm going to pass the baton over to our Vice President of Sales at Collective Sun, Matt Brennan. So here you go, Matt.
Thanks, Lindsay, for that. Can you hear me okay? I'll assume that you can. Just text me if you cannot. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Maddie over at Resonant Energy and Jim McDaniel at St. Peter's. And this is a very unique project. It's a special project. And we've done a number of projects with Resonant. This is not the first. They've been a great partner over the years. So we're particularly excited about this solar project in general. So let me tell you just a little bit about Collective Sun. We work nationwide. And we have worked with a little over 150 nonprofit organizations across 19 states. And our focus is on nonprofits and tax-exempt entities. And I use the word nonprofits broadly. Now, if you were to look at our project page, you'll see a lot of communities of faith that we've worked with. That is our largest category. And we'll talk a little bit about why we focus on nonprofits. Because they're tax exempt, they don't have a tax appetite. But we also work with other tax exempt entities such as schools, municipalities, HOAs, really anyone who doesn't have a tax appetite. So when we say nonprofits, I'm using that term broadly, and it even extends to a for-profit that doesn't have a tax appetite in any given year for whatever reason, and they can't use the solar tax credit. So let's go ahead and just move on to the next slide. Thanks, Lindsay. And let me talk a little bit about the problem we're solving. When an organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, or residential unit, or a homeowner, let's say, when they do solar or solar with storage, they get a tax credit, or there is a tax credit available. Currently, it's 26%. However, if you are a tax exempt entity, if you're a church, a mosque, a synagogue, a spiritual center, an HOA, you don't have a tax appetite. So that tax credit, that 26% tax credit, gets left on the table if you go out and buy a system and own it on day one. So we help with that. We help all of our clients or nonprofit clients indirectly kind of monetize these tax credits. And we do that through something we call a solar power agreement. It's essentially a prepaid lease or a prepaid service contract. I'm not going to talk a ton about the details on that on this webinar. We have lots of supporting material for that, so just reach out. We have a short video. We have one-pagers. You can always call and talk with me or someone at Collective Sun, so we can fill you in on that. But what this solar power agreement does is it allows nonprofits to capture at least some of the tax credit. So we pass through a 12% discount. So when we'll talk about St. Peter's, the project here, when they went to do their system, Resident Energy brought us on board, and St. Peter's at the time wasn't sure if they were going to buy the system on day one, if they were going to borrow money or use cash reserves. But instead of using 100% of their funds, they only used 88%. We contributed 12% to the project cost. And what happens is that instead of St. Peter's owning the system on day one, we own it. We actually own it. We operate it. We maintain it for 6 years. At the end of the 6-year ownership, reverts back to the nonprofit, to St. Peter's in this case, and they only fund 88% of the project cost. So they get a bit of a discount, which is helpful, and they don't have the burden of ownership. We own it. We operate it. We maintain it. We have a production guarantee, which is a good thing for the nonprofit. And that what I'm describing is a solar power agreement or this prepaid service contract. And that was our key role in this project. And again, I won't go into details. We could talk more about that a little bit later. Lizzie, could you move to the next slide? So again, I mentioned the solar power agreement. That's where we own, operate, and maintain the system for 6 years. And the nonprofits contribute 88% of that project cost. We put in 12. Now, the question is, with a lot of nonprofits, and some nonprofits come to us early in the process, or they come to us late. They've already talked to contractors. They know what they want to do, and they just want to figure out how to, capture this tax credit. But in any event, they're thinking about, well, how are we going to fund this? In our case, the 88%. And there are lots of different ways, and I'll mention how St. Peter's did it. But these are the key ways that we see nonprofits doing it. Commercial PACE loans are a great way to finance solar projects. They're long-term, typically 20 years. You can get them lower, you can do 10, 15, 20, sometimes even longer. We see a lot of 20-year PACE loans. Those are nice because of the length of a loan makes that, principal and interest payment low enough where these projects cash flow. That means the loan or the debt obligation is lower than the savings, or the saving. Another way to say it, the savings is greater than the loan payment. So the cash flow. And these PACE loans are assessed on property tax bills. Now you may say you're a nonprofit. We don't pay property tax. And that may be true. But in most areas, you're still on the property tax rolls. You're just tax exempt. So you get a zero bill. But in those cases, CPACE can still be used. Now, just to move on, a few of the other ways that the 88% is funded are very obvious. Cash reserves, donations, mission-aligned lenders. By that, we mean folks like Thrivent that are doing loans in the community to religious organizations, and we've done projects with them. Of course, traditional lenders, right? If you've already done capital improvement projects at your organization, you may have worked with a traditional lender. And those are great ways to go about, funding these projects. And we can make introductions to traditional lenders we've worked with, and also mission-aligned lenders that may be interested in funding your project, for this 88%. Crowd lending. We've done a few projects across the country where we borrow money from the community of the nonprofit itself. If that's at all of interest to you, we'd love to take a look at your project and talk a little bit about how we go about that. But if you have investment interest from your own community, lots of times those rates and terms will be better than anywhere else you can get, those terms. And impact investors. We're starting to work with family foundations. We have a great program starting here in Southern California. Again, we work nationwide, but we're talking with impact investors across the country about funding projects. So we'd be happy to tell you a bit more about that. And I'm going to pass over in just a second, but with St. Peter's, what they did, they actually used funds from their own endowment. That's not always available. I know Jim's going to talk more about that. But that is how St. Peter's funded the 88%. It's kind of a recap of what we do, and I think I'm going to hand it off.
Hi, everybody. My name is Madeline Barr. I'm the VP of Outreach and Sales and a co-founder at Resonant Energy. Glad to see so many people from Massachusetts, California, New York, and around the country joining us today, and hope to meet some of you in person maybe sometime soon. Go to the next slide. So I'll share just a little bit about myself and Resonant Energy, and then sort of talk about our role in the solar ecosystem and how we work with organizations like St. Peter's. Personally, my background is in energy efficiency, solar, electric vehicles. I'm driven by this idea that we can use solar and renewable energy as a tool for not just building a cleaner climate, but also building stronger, more resilient, more interconnected, more equitable communities. And so that's what really draws me to this work. And at Resonant Energy, what our focus is on expanding access to clean energy. We work primarily with nonprofits, both houses of worship and affordable housing organizations. We actually got our start in this church you see pictured here. This is Second Church in Dorchester, right in Codman Square. And our office was in that church for the first about 2 to 3 years of our company. We helped them install their solar array by bringing in a trusted installation partner and impact financing. We actually partner with the organization you can see right across the street from them, which is the Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation. And so we work throughout Massachusetts and parts of New York. Yeah, and that's good for this slide. We can go to the next one. So a little bit in more detail about how we work. So there's a lot of moving parts in the solar industry. I'm sure those of you who have taken on installing a solar project for your organization have encountered a lot of different barriers, a lot of information. In Massachusetts, I know the incentives change regularly. And so Resonant sort of sits as a hub, trying to bring together the different resources to address the barriers that have traditionally stood in the way of nonprofits being able to go forward with solar. So just starting here at the left side, we work with, out of the 300 solar installers in Massachusetts, we work with the top 5 to 8 partners that we know do good work, that are vetted, and that we have trusted partnerships with. And so we'll select one of those partners for each project that we work on. Moving clockwise, we work with a network of financiers, organizations that offer a unique financing option, just like Collective Sun, to help organizations move forward with their project. And you heard from Matt a little bit about how the Collective Sun model works. We refer to it as a hybrid ownership, because while Matt noted that Collective Sun owns the project for the first few years, the nonprofit still gets the full benefit of the electricity and the state incentives, which we have found makes it really appealing for a lot of organizations. We also work with mission-aligned lenders to help close the gap on the other 88% of the project, and a variety of other impact financiers to help organizations that maybe are not in a place to take out a loan or to own their system outright. So we do provide power purchase agreements and site leases that still allow your organization to move forward with solar, both no upfront cost. Back to the other slide. So with the financial analysis, we have a dedicated team at Resonant Energy that focuses on the analytics. So the incentive policies in Massachusetts change pretty regularly. We also understand that many nonprofits have a longer decision-making process. And so we work to create a proposal that will model pretty closely exactly what your savings will look like throughout the lifetime of the project, and what incentive tiers and what programs you'll be eligible for. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation, but we essentially run about 15 different scenarios looking at, if we max out your roof, if we limit it to just covering your electricity usage, looking at different financing offers, so that we can offer you at least 2 pathways of moving forward, recognizing that your organization and the path you want to take depends on a variety of factors: your financial constraints, your organization's priorities, if you've already committed your building money to building a handicap ramp. And so we really strive to meet organizations where they're at. And then we partner with trusted organizations like Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light that then can help us connect these programs to organizations that can really use them. We can go next slide. So just an overview of what some of the incentives are, which will inform our conversation moving forward. But what is available nationwide is the federal investment tax credit, which at the end of 2020 was extended for an additional 2 years at the 26% mark, which is good news, even for organizations that are tax exempt. A lot of the financing, including collective sons programs and some of the third-party financed power purchase agreements, depend on there being a robust federal tax credit. In Massachusetts, we have the Massachusetts Smart Incentive, which is it's a direct deposit to the owner of the solar array. And the value that you get for that depends on the size of the project, where it's located, if it qualifies as a parking canopy or as a community solar that have these different additional incentive values. And this comes as a direct deposit, as cash to your organization every month for the first 10 or 20 years of owning the solar. And then net metering and virtual net metering, which again, some of you might be familiar with, but net metering refers to the process that you can sell your electricity back to the grid at times that you're not using it. So if you are running a school and the sun is shining the most in the summertime, when students are not using the building, you can sell that back to the grid and you get credit onto your bill. But the utility, and this is a key part of what I'll explain next, but the utility will never give you a cash check. They work in credits. So you can accumulate those credits on your bill, or what virtual net metering refers to is that you can assign them to a different bill. And maybe that's from your parish house to your rectory, or in this case, maybe it's to an entirely different organization. Go next slide. So one of the things we're especially excited about with this project is that St. Peter's decided to install solar to double the amount of power that they actually need on site. And around the time that I was working with Jim and his team at St. Peter's, we were also in touch with Yusuf Mosque in Brighton, which is in Boston, that has a slate roof for solar, which means essentially not super eligible. Slate roof is really tricky to work with, it's super expensive to work with, and is overall not a great candidate to install solar on the roof. So we set up an arrangement where we can assign via the electric bill the excess electricity produced from the St. Peter's array to the electric bill at the mosque. And then in exchange, the mosque can then buys that power from St. Peter's at a set 15% discount. And to make that whole transaction work, we've been working with the Cambridge-based provider, My Sun Buddy, to create a custom platform to allow this transaction to happen seamlessly. And so that's how we can actually turn even though the utility works only in credit, being able to create this, what turns into an additional revenue stream for St. Peter's while delivering high savings to the mosque. So it's a project we're really, really excited about. And it's been great being able to work with both St. Peter's and the team at Yusuf Mosque. And what I want to point out about this too is where it's different than traditional community solar that you might have heard of. Community solar typically refers to a large solar array, usually in a field or on farmland or in former forests. And this allows us to use existing built space to expand clean energy and clean energy use. And the 15% discount is about twice the savings of a typical community solar array, because it's not just 15% on only supply, but it's 15% of the entire bill. And so we're really excited to highlight this program and to talk a little bit more about the process of moving through it. I'll introduce Jim McDaniel, who's chair of the property committee at St. Peter's.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to you out west. As Madeline said, my name is Jim McDaniel. Although my day job has been as a lawyer for many years, of more relevance for today is that I've been a longtime member of the congregation at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Weston, Massachusetts, which is a suburb about 14 miles west of downtown Boston. As has been mentioned already, St. Peter's recently completed installing solar panels on the roof of our church building, which you can see here. There'll be some other pictures later that show the actual panels. And I've been asked to share some of my observations about that process with you. And one of the reasons I'm really excited to speak to you today is a little over a year ago, I watched a webinar very much like this one and listened to Madeline and Matt explain their approach to installing solar for nonprofits. So I was basically in your chair about a year ago, and now we've come full circle. I'm joining their webinar to give you the user's perspective and hopefully to let you know that you can do this too. I just want to be transparent up front to let you know where we are in the process. We have the panels fully installed. All the installation is complete. We are now just awaiting our local utility to complete their paperwork so they can energize the panels. So I can't speak to the process beyond that point, although in the course of doing our due diligence, we spoke to a number of churches that worked with this team, so I can at least base some observations on their experience, which we anticipate to be similar for St. Peter's. So a little bit of background information about St. Peter's, because I know there are a number of different types of organizations, both larger, smaller, different kinds of organizations. This is just the mission statement for our church and a shot of the interior. St. Peter's is one of 180 parishes in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts. But we're actually governed locally by a board that's called the vestry, which is elected by the congregation. And we are totally self-supporting financially. And we are, in fact, as those of you from Massachusetts will know, located in an affluent suburb. But like many mainline Protestant churches, we have fewer members than when our lovely church building was opened in 1959. Our annual budget is around $490,000, and we struggle every year to balance it. We do have a modest endowment, but about a third of that is earmarked for charitable contributions to other organizations. And the rest of our draw is totally consumed with maintaining our program. So as a result of that, we pinch pennies whenever we can. And we think long and hard about any sort of capital improvement for our facilities. I don't want to just dwell on the financial aspects though, because St. Peter's is an active and vibrant Episcopal church. We provide pastoral care within our community. But we also have a long tradition of activism and partnership with organizations that address homelessness, affordable housing, social justice, outreach to immigrants, and promotion of interfaith understanding and cooperation. So there's some background. Maybe you can go to the next slide, Lindsay. I'll just show you, here's a picture of our rector in the center, Lynn Campbell, who's been with us for 5 years. She's been a very important advocate for this whole process throughout. And I think that's always, if you're a church, always very important to have the sort of the spiritual leader of your community behind the process. And let me turn to, and maybe you can just advance to the next slide. Let me give you a little background about our solar journey, because my guess is that a number of you are, at various stages in your own journey. We kind of trace the beginning of our thinking about this to 2013. We decided to undertake a capital campaign. Our church is relatively new for an East Coast church, but 50 years of deferred maintenance had given us a long to-do list. And so we decided at that point to undertake a capital campaign to try to chip away at those. And we knew we had a longer list than we were going to have money to spend. So we surveyed our parishioners to find out what they thought the priority should be. And one of the top priorities was really to try to reduce the church's carbon footprint, primarily through improving our energy efficiency. I was then senior warden at St. Peter's, which is the principal lay leader of the congregation, and I recruited a small group of people to serve on our property committee to carry out the improvements. Fairly early on, we learned that we could actually stretch our dollars a little bit further by getting so-called green grants from our diocese. Our diocese has been very focused on the environment and particularly climate change, and they had some grants and loan money available for various projects. One of the prerequisites for getting this money was to attend a workshop, which two of us did, and we were then introduced to Mass Interfaith Power and Light, which has been a very effective proponent for environmental sustainability among a whole range of religious organizations in Massachusetts. And I think there are counterparts in many, if not most states. And I'm going to say a little bit more about them in a bit. We did get a couple of grants from the diocese to stretch out our dollars, and we went to work replacing the insulation on our parish house. We changed all our old light bulbs. We replaced 50 old drafty windows, and we thought about solar panels, but we ultimately at that time concluded that was a bridge too far. We just didn't think we had the money or the bandwidth to try to tackle that. And then in 2018, so a little over 3 years ago, on a separate project, we were looking for a new house, for a better, more suitable house for our rector. And the house we ultimately located had solar panels already installed on the roof, which is a little unusual in Eastern Massachusetts, probably more common elsewhere in the country. And we saw that as a plus, but none of us really knew much about solar, and we really didn't appreciate its implications. Over the course of that year, we started getting these electricity bills of zero, and we had net metering credits, and we got the local utility to apply those to the church's electricity bill to reduce that bill. Plus, we received a quarterly check for the Massachusetts renewable energy credits. So in short, these panels were funneling money into the church. And this really led to a paradigm shift for us. And we started looking at this roof, which you can see on our church. It's a beautiful south-facing large roof. We started looking at it with great interest. And of course, at the same time, the headlines about climate change were not getting any better. And we thought, we probably needed to step up our game on that account as well. So in late 2019, we reached out to a solar provider who had done some local work, and they came back with a proposal. Unfortunately, it looked like, because we were a nonprofit entity, we could not take advantage of the 26% federal tax credit, which was disappointing. Also, we learned, or were told, that there was really no point in putting up panels to produce more electricity than we were going to utilize, because we couldn't sell those net metering credits to third parties. So we were a little underwhelmed, but not completely deterred. And we decided to reach back out to Mass Interfaith Power and Light, to Jim Nail specifically, who's the president. I think he's actually on this webinar. So Jim, I hope I get all this correct, but we asked him for some recommendations. And one of the firms that he suggested that we reach out to was Resonant Energy. And they had an upcoming webinar scheduled. So we watched that webinar, and it was really kind of a revelation to us. And Madeline and Matt explained their approach, particularly the hybrid approach. And guess what we learned? We learned there is a way to monetize the federal tax credit, even if you're a nonprofit, by partnering with Collective Sun. And Resonant could lay out a whole range of options for us on how to size and finance the project. So within literally a day or two, we were emailing back and forth with Madeline. And that was in March of last year, just when everything went into lockdown. In our first Zoom call with Madeline, we mentioned to her that we were thinking of installing only enough panels to cover our own electricity usage, since we had heard we weren't allowed to sell excess production. And Madeline, of course, immediately informed us that yes, we could sell that excess production, and Resonant could help us do that. Then we mentioned this unusual wrinkle we had, which is our rectory, our residence for our pastor, already was producing solar energy that we were using to apply to the church's bill, because we were considered the same customer. But once we had solar panels on the church, that bill would go to zero. So were we going to lose the benefit of the rectory's excess production? And she said, no, we can help you sell that too. So we were definitely intrigued. And before very long, we had several options proposed by Resonant. And although it went through several tweaks along the way, it's pretty much along the lines of what you see here. It ultimately called for the installation of 75 solar panels that will generate about 37,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, and will exceed our electricity usage by about 60%. Our electricity bill will go down to zero with an estimated savings of about $5,600 a year. And we were also projected to receive about $3,400 in Massachusetts SMART incentives. And then the sale of the excess electricity from the church and the rectory would bring us another $3,500. So when we totaled all of that together, it's actually, I think the number's a little higher than the number on the slide. I think it's 12,400, because that includes the rectory piece as well. So that's a very nice savings, a very meaningful amount of savings for us. Plus, Resonant provided a very helpful piece of information to kind of help us conceptualize the carbon savings. The projected reduction in carbon as a result of this project would be the equivalent of preserving 34 acres of forest. So the next question obviously was, how much was this going to cost? And Resonant estimated actually the total cost would be around $91,000. If we partnered with Collective Sun, we would get the 12% discount, if you will, or Collective Sun would pay the 12% of that, and the cost would go down to $80,000. And they laid out a number of options, Resonant did, for how to cover this amount. And Matt touched on those earlier. And we were initially thinking that we would borrow the $80,000. We don't have a huge endowment, and we have lots of needs for it. But and Resonant was aware, because they worked with other local Episcopal churches, that our diocese had this green loan program. that offered extremely attractive loan terms to Episcopal churches, a very low interest rate. And we had that modeled out for us by Resonant. What would it look like? And it was good, and but we would still be paying something like $17,000 in interest to the diocese over the course of the loan term. And we loved the diocese, but we thought, maybe we should think about self-funding. And so we raised that with Madeline, and they did out projections to see what the internal rate of return would be if we treated this essentially as a green investment by our endowment. And the internal rate of return was around 15%, which was pretty good. So we had a very interesting proposal from Resonant. But before we went to even to the letter of intent stage, we felt we needed to do our due diligence on these guys. So we checked references for both. I think we checked with 4 different churches that had worked up with one or the other or both. And we received glowing reviews, really positive. And we asked not only how did the process go, but are you getting what they told you were going to get in terms of cash flow and savings? And they were. We also asked Resonant for the assumptions underlying their projections. And they happily provided those to us, because obviously if you're talking about future savings, it all depends on what assumptions you're building into that. And we took those assumptions to some third-party experts to say, are these reasonable or are they crazy? And they came back saying, yes, these are reasonable estimates, if anything, a little bit conservative. So we felt very comfortable proceeding with both of these as long-term partners in this process. We went to our vestry, who we had been keeping them informed. Just bear in mind that the property committee at St. Peter's was kind of the driving force here, which is a little unusual. But we kept the vestry informed along the way. They gave us the green light to have Resonant put this project out to bid. And as Madeline mentioned, they put it out to bid to 3 very reputable local solar installers, and we went with the best price and the best availability provider. And that was sort of the end of November is when we really got kind of into the bid stage. We went back to the vestry a final time with the definitive proposal. They looked at the funding models, both for borrowing and for self-funding. And we sort of stayed out of the discussion a little bit at the property committee level because we really thought this was a governing board decision. But the vestry, which has some pretty sophisticated financial people on it, decided to treat this as an investment of a portion of our endowment and a socially responsible investment that is, as it turns out, totally aligned with the priorities of our diocese. It's not formally characterized as a loan from the endowment. I think the vestry will have the discretion to determine how future cash flows get applied, whether they get paid back into the endowment or are used for other vestry designated purposes. I'm going to skip over the construction process, but I just want to touch on this last piece of the puzzle to fall into place, which was the sale of our excess electricity. I mean, Madeline's already mentioned the solar sharing platform concept, and quite honestly, we hadn't given it much thought, other than, it was a column on the spreadsheet that was really going to, help the financial picture for us. But when Madeline said that in working with their partner, my son Buddy, they had identified a mosque in Brighton that would like to buy the energy. We were honestly thrilled. As I mentioned, St. Peter's has a long tradition of fostering interfaith cooperation and understanding. So this was kind of a mission consistent development for us. We've been active with the Weston Wayland Interfaith Action Group for many years. A key member of that group is the Islamic Center of Boston, which is located right next door in Wayland. And they were actually have been a supporter of Yusuf Mosque in their formation in Brighton. So this was a really nice turn of events for us. I wish I could say that we had this in mind all along, but it was a wonderful addition to this project. We are planning a joint blessing ceremony of the solar panels for September, where we will have, St. Peter's and representatives from the mosque present. So that's a hugely positive development. I want to pause there and maybe ask Lindsay to advance to the next slide. So going from pictures to a spreadsheet is a little bit jarring, but I have to say that I kind of love this slide as much as the last one. This is the kind of analysis that we got from resident that helped us make our decision. And Madeline's done a nice job annotating it. And I think I'll ask Madeline if you could jump on and maybe walk people briefly through some of the categories so they can see the kind of analysis that you provide to the customers who work with you.
Yeah, happy to. And oh, can you? Here we go. Okay. Yeah, and I love that you share our team's excitement for detailed spreadsheets, Jim. And so this is really a sort of a super spreadsheet. We cover, I think, starting over at the left side. I'll go through pretty quickly. But our goal with providing this level of detail is to show our assumptions that go into the model, and to be transparent about where those numbers are coming from. So over here at the left, we have the total amount of kilowatt hours. So that's the actual electricity that the system is producing. Kilowatt hours, that's the same unit that your electric bill is measured in, starting in year one, and then you'll notice a slight decline each year due to just standard equipment degradation. Because of the design of this project, we then have the number of kilowatt hours and the rate that is going to offset the electricity cost for St. Peter's. So that's their estimated utility savings, the savings to St. Peter's. This next group of columns is the amount of extra. And so as Jim noted, when we were putting together this design, we knew that we would need to find a subscriber. And so we noted that in this next section, which is, and it turned out to be Yusuf Mosque, but we knew that we had to find a partner for this other 13,000 kilowatt hours. And you'll see here that they're buying it at a slightly decreased rate. So that's where their 15% discount comes into play. And so they're buying it at that rate, and that looks to St. Peter's as revenue coming in through that platform that we're building out with my Sunbuddy. And then this is the Massachusetts Smart Incentive. So again, all of this is in sort of value per kilowatt hour. And this is the expected annual revenue. It comes in on a monthly basis, but the annual revenue from the SMART program. There is another program in Massachusetts, referred to the Massachusetts Renewable Energy Credit. That's a slightly different incentive structure, but still an estimated value going back to the organization when the SMART program expires. And then we do also include in our model expected insurance and maintenance costs. The first 6 years have no maintenance costs because those are covered by Collective Sun. But then we do put in estimates so that you have that budget item in your organization's future planning. We can customize what kind of loan we estimate. So here we modeled in the loan that's offered through the Episcopal Diocese Green Fund, which is 15 years at 2.5%. This might be a little outdated right now, just because it was I think probably about a year and a half old. And then your annual benefits, and then cumulative savings as well. And so just to show that, I mean, you can see very clearly here that between the electricity savings, the electricity revenue, the smart incentive, even with the loan payment, this project was more than covering the debt service on a potential loan. And then up here as well, just to not overlook it, as Jim had noted earlier, the original cost of the project was about $91,000. And then with the Collective Sun discount of 12%, we shaved off about $11K. And so that's just quick. We will, for each financing model that we look at, we'll include a similar detailed cash flow, just like this. So I'll pass back to Jim.
Great. Thanks, Madeline. I'm just going to wrap up my remarks by saying that here you can see the installed panels on our church. The installation of these panels has been really one of the most popular achievements within our parish in many years, certainly within my memory at this faith community. The leadership of the parish is thrilled with its contribution to our financial sustainability. The many parishioners at St. Peter's who are deeply concerned about climate change are thrilled that we're not just talking the talk, but we're walking the walk, and dramatically decreasing our carbon footprint. And the parishioners who have devoted decades of support to interfaith understanding are thrilled that we are partnering with a Muslim faith community to benefit our shared planet. So it's really been a win-win-win for us. And I sincerely believe that all of you out there can do the same, if not a better job than we have. And I certainly want to thank our partners, Resonant and Collective Sun, for helping us through this process. We didn't know a lot going in, but we had some very knowledgeable partners who could help us bring this to a very successful conclusion. And I think now maybe I'll turn it back to Lindsay or whoever's going to be moderating our Q&A session.
We answered some of the Q&A, live as we were going in the chat. But real quick, I just wanted to add, thank you, Jim, for doing such a great job of summarizing everything in your process, and really, and thank you. You really said some nice things about us and Resonant. And one thing I'd like to add is that this is a unique project. As far as I know, it's a first of its kind. Massachusetts has this, really compelling arrangement where you could really, potentially sell energy to another off-taker, and to have your church do that with a mosque, and it's just a fantastic thing. So we really do hope to see more of this, and however we can support that, that would be great. So thank you for that, and for your love of spreadsheets. That made a lot of people happy on our side, as well as residents. Maddie, would you like to? There's a few here that were really on the Q&A that were best answered by Resonant. Do you want to pick a couple of these and go through that, or do you want me to ask them to you? But you can go ahead and just run with it.
Sure. Yeah. This first one is about interconnection, which, just to give a little bit of detail about that, interconnection is the process by which we have to get approval from the utility. So even with this community sharing community solar sharing setup with St. Peter's, the church is always still going to be connected to the utility. And even when we do add storage to projects, they will still be on grid. Luckily, the utility is not the easiest partner to work with, but luckily with this project, it went very smoothly. The project, partly because of the size of it, it didn't hit any major obstacles with Eversource. But if Martin, if you're in Massachusetts and are having particular challenges with the utility, feel free to write me separately, and we can share some of our escalation best practices. There were a bunch of questions about the process by which St. Peter's sent electricity credits to use of mosque. So I can speak to that for just a minute too. That the process that allows that is what's called virtual net metering. So again, because the church is still connected to the utility, we set up on the back end the paperwork that tells the utility send 100% of the excess credits to this other electric account, and that electric account is for the mosque. And the sharing can only happen within the same utility. So these are both organizations within Eversource territory. So we can set it up on the back end that the credits go to the mosque. And again, because they're credits, the mosque then through the software platform will get an electronic invoice, and they can make an electronic payment to St. Peter's at the agreed upon rate, which is that 15% discount. I'm just reading this question. Oh, and do we do it in other states? Right now, because it's fairly custom, and you have to make sure, or rather we have to make sure that the credits and the savings all match up with each other, and that the utility will let us, that we're setting it up, the paperwork properly on the back end. We're only offering it in Massachusetts right now.
Maddie, there's a number of questions about, where we all work. And just real quickly here, we don't have that much time, but, with Collective Sun, we work across the country. The limiting factor for us is the utility, whether or not they allow third-party ownership. So that's a question when we go into a new utility, and this is opening up across the country. When I say third-party ownership, I'm talking about solar leasing and power purchase agreements. If they allow one or the other, we can work there. For example, things started opening up in North Carolina and Florida. Somebody asked about Alabama. We haven't done a project in Alabama, but please reach out to us. We can help. And Resident has their own footprint as well at the moment. And Maddie, you want to talk a little bit about the geographies that you do serve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are in project work. We're only in Massachusetts and New York. We do some consulting work outside of those two states. But because a lot of our work is really very hands-on and very based in who the local installers are and the local partners, our project development work is just in Massachusetts and New York. In Alabama, one thing that comes to my mind is we participated in a DOE energy grant program a few years ago. And I believe that information is still public. And I think there was a team from Alabama trying to make solar work. I remember it because I remember thinking like, oh gosh, Alabama, like, dude, I had no idea what the solar incentives were in Alabama. But if you check out the Department of Energy Solar in Your Community Sunshot Challenge, it's a potential resource where there could be some people who are also trying to do solar in Alabama.
And Maddie, if I could just add on to that, because I accidentally hit answer live on one of the questions rather than type it in. You mentioned some of the incentives, and that is a good going to the DOE website to find out what your incentives are. When you work with Collective Sun, we do this 12% discount, but the incentives stay with the host or the church or whoever the nonprofit is, because somebody asked about the Masters of Smart Incentive. It's a direct deposit that does end up going to the host, not to us. Slate roofs, Maddie, they are challenging.
Yeah.
You asked about that. If you have one, I mean, as Maddie said, it's not impossible. It can be done at some cost. But with energy rates the way they are, depending on what part of the country you're in, you work with what you got, and it may still, there still may be a way to do it.
Yeah, we've looked into a few slate roofs, Yusuf Mosque included. And it's there is a racking solution for slate roofs where it's not impossible, but because you would have to work with a specialty slate roofer to make sure that the attachments of the solar racking don't damage the slate shingles, it adds considerable cost to the project. And so for organizations that have slate roofs, if you're in Massachusetts, we'd love to talk about getting you onto this solar sharing platform, because we have a number of other organizations that are in the process of getting what we call their permission to operate from the utility, where that will also be overproducing. So we will have some extra capacity to bring new organizations on. So those who have a slate roof, please write me afterwards and we can talk about that. And just to throw a number out there, the cost of a slate roofer for like a 25 kilowatt system, so about the size of the St. Peter's project, we've seen slate add like $30,000 to $40,000 of cost.
We will follow up with everyone on who registered or asked questions, Collective Sun and resident. If we didn't get to your question, we will be following up. You'll have our contact information. It's also shown there on the screen. But thank you. I think that's about it. Maddie, we're out of time. Would you like to have this a closing remark? And Jim, you as well.
No, just thank you. Appreciate. I know there's been a lot of screen time over the past year, and it's been a hard year, and really appreciate everyone taking time and for keeping clean energy on your minds and at the top of or at least on the docket for your organizations. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today.
Yeah, and I'll just add, my email is on the slide that's on the screen, and I'd be happy to offer any observations, so tips, words of wisdom. Particularly, I didn't really get into the internal politics that much, but I certainly can have some hopefully helpful suggestions there as well. So don't hesitate if you want to reach out to me separately via email.
All right, Lindsay, back to you.
Yeah, at this point, thank you all so much for being here. We're thrilled with the webinar, and we'll be following up with you very shortly with the webinar slides, the recording, and a quick recap. And I'm sure our panel will also be happy to answer any Q&A that you have. So we'll be following up with you very soon. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.